Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Multiverse Fundraiser. You're stuck with me for another hour. Y'all know I can talk, and I've got two lovely guests here to talk about indie comics with me today. We are supporting Comic Books for Kids. That's our charity. I keep forgetting to put the ticker banner up before I start. I am batting 1,000 on all of my episodes this weekend. All right. That's where you can donate if you would like to. What is this beeping I'm hearing? Okay, anyway, all that done. Let me introduce our guest. First, I have David, who writes for Dusk Comics. We'll get into what you do in a minute. Love the beard. We love a good beard. You're like a Viking. And then y'all have heard me, if you watch the Cosplay Cafe, talk about this guy, and you've seen a couple of his cosplays. This is my brother, Brad.
Hey.
Welcome, guys. Thank you. As I was telling David earlier, we've had a lot of artists talk about indie comics, and some of them that are writers, but you don't get the writers much. So it's good to have a couple of guys that are on the other side of the board to talk about comics today. So let me get started. Who would like to go first and tell us how they got into being a comic creator?
Either or. I can talk until the sun sets.
I know you can, so can I. David, how about you start then, sir?
I always wanted to make comics. That was the thing growing up. And it was one of those where I remember it was a British publisher was doing this little thing to where like, oh, send us a short comic and we'll publish it. And I did that, and they had I didn't realize how small they were.
Oh, are we losing you?
Didn't go anywhere.
David, did we lose you? There you went. You popped out for a second. It froze on us. Like we were talking just fine the whole time before, and then you for a second there. Okay, we're good now. Sounds like we're good.
Okay. So yeah, I was saying when I was young, I always wanted to make comics, and I decided to focus on writing because my art was never not to what I wanted it to be. And I remember I submitted for this thing, the open call with a British publisher, and then that kind of they did the issue, then died out, and then I started. I went with another publisher, and they were trying to do the whole. And of course, this is all before crowdfunding, so we kind of had to do it a lot more creatively, and that didn't pan out either. And we were playing with this this printing house that would print books for pretty cheap, but they didn't do comics, so it was an interesting way to do that. They fell, so I was like, oh, I'm going to make my own comics, and then I decided to, I was like, oh, I can make my own comics. I decided to publish other people's comics, and then I've had to pull back in recent years because you'll find being a writer means you're not just a comic writer. You're the comic editor. You're the comic marketer. You're the HR department, which gets a little weird with complaints. And you have to do a lot more than just write when you're writing comics.
That kind of sounds like you, Brad, with doing everything but the art sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yes.
Oh, you keep going.
I've even done some of the graphic design sometimes, which you could still see like there was one volume where I had to redo. They didn't, the printer didn't understand a full bleed. So I had to just put a solid color around it.
Yeah.
But I was basically just doing a simple paint, draw the rectangle in, and I got a smidge just off on the spine. So you can see like two little red marks from the spine because it was me doing the design like that night.
Y'all done some short deadline ones, Brad.
Yeah.
You want to give us a little bit of your background there? I know it, but
I was going to take a minute and say this is probably the only form of nepotism I'll ever enjoy, so I'm going to soak it in a little bit, getting invited on because my sister runs it. But I don't know. I guess we've always read comics. We started with Spider-Man, X-Men. We always went from there, but it was never. I never I wasn't a 12-year-old who was like, I'm gonna write comics when I grow up. But what I noticed is like throughout my life, like most people who their dreams change as they go through life, mine, like if there was a time where I wanted to make movies and I was studying movies and I was writing scripts and I was doing this. So then that slowly evolved into like I loved video games and I loved the story of that and I did that. And there was even a time where we were making board games together and I loved that and I was writing stories. And it got to a point where I realized the dream, the core, I guess the structure that surrounds the dream changed, but what was still the same throughout was I was writing. I was writing everything. Like we made a board game, which board games roll dice, have fun, but I was spending hours building backstory and stuff that just didn't matter to anyone but me in the format I had chosen. Now in video games or movies, it'd be different. So when in about 2010, 2011, our brother Scoot got really back into artwork and he was wanting to draw. And he said he wanted to draw some comic book stuff. So I said, hey, get in there and I'll make you a story. And we kind of started brainstorming a story together and came up with some ideas. And then I thought, well, obviously this is what I want to do. I don't care what format it's in. I like to write. So I need to start honing that skill. I need to start working on that skill. And so I started reading books about it, like Brian Michael Bendis' Word for Pictures, screenwriting books like Method and Madness, stuff like that, just to build this creative story or build these creative tools and skills and focus them. So instead of worrying about where the script was going or what I was doing for, I just realized I had stories I wanted to tell. I had universes I wanted to create and let these characters breathe and live. And what to me became most fun and why I stuck with comics, because I would still, if someone came to me and said, write a video game, I'd do it all day. But what I like about comics is like the creative aspect. I used to refer to it as a relay race where I write my script and then I pass the baton. But as Dave just pointed out, man, you're always involved. And it's more like a rowing contest. Everybody's rowing this boat together. And for example, like if I write the script, Scoot takes it, starts doing the story. He's doing thumbnails. We're working that out together. Then he'll change the story ever so subtly based on his artwork. And then you get the inker, because if you get a good inker and colors, then they elevate it and bring more life to it than if I was just to say, I'm going to dump base colors in here and get it out in the world. A really good colorist will make it completely different as a long, or I guess, elevate the project. And then when you letter it, it all comes together and you're involved from the very beginning. So that collaborative effort, that idea that you're involved with the product from beginning to end. And even though I may write the script, I may create the characters, it's still, when you get to the end, it's not just your project. Unless you're doing all of those yourself, which is absurd. It's a collaborative effort, and it's this really unique sort of teamwork. I'm sure you get something similar in movies, but to me, comics have been unmatched in everything I've written. Just the collaborative effort is so much fun.
There's a couple of things I want to touch on that Brad brought up. And
I'll let y'all
right.
talk.
Okay.
I will, if there's silence, I will fill it, but I've enjoyed listening to the two of you talk.
Brad, you're right. The collaborative thing, I think, is pretty important. And I've never done screenwriting and stuff. And so I only imagine there's more people involved with movies and such. And maybe there's just too much input and you're not as intimately involved, because I always think, with comics, you're more close knit. And the best example I do is collaborative is, and I don't have the page. I should have loaded up the page. It's a great example I give, where I did it was a typical vampire story, and I did a 9-panel grid. And it was just, a friend was seeing another friend, but he turned into a vampire and he's trying not to eat him. So, all that angst and all and resisting. And I just did it as a 9-panel grid where at the end he finally succumbs, and bites his friend. So the artist knew that's where it was going. So he took the panel layout and he made it all flow down in a dramatic way to that last panel. So it drew your eye there. And I'm like, I would have never have thought that, without his input. And so it's great because, and you're right with the colors, like, sometimes, our artists I've worked with, like I do a lot of horror. And like one guy was like, well, since this is a darker story, he did a lot more muted colors and all that to give it kind of a saturated, more, a different feel than just regular, Captain America comics where everything's, pop and vibrant. And also I want to say it's good to, that you did and anyone can make comics however they want. And it just works with what, the artists and the rest of the team. But I found a few folks who they would get into comics, but they wouldn't learn it. They would just like, I remember one guy, an artist in particular, guy just had some short stories and literally just handed it to the artist. So the artist had to go and break it down, figure out the layouts and the paneling and how the dialogue would flow. And I was like, dude, you wrote that basically. He plotted it with the short stories, but you basically wrote the comic. So, and people forget that, all the writing mediums are similar, but they're different enough where I'm not going to sit down and go, oh, I can make a screenplay now. It's like, no, that's not, it's not a lateral shift to each one. It does give you a better understanding and, a better foundation, but I wouldn't say it's you just go, oh, now I'm going to write video games. I never did one, but it's all, at least what I found.
Yeah. And I had to comment because you said, I usually joke that our family's documentary is eventually going to be called Poor, Bored, and Creative. But if there is silence, I will fill it is a close second. That is just a minute ago, and that's incredible because, I will.
It's part of our undiagnosed autism and ADHD. We don't really like awkward silences.
I tell people I can't scuba dive because I can't keep my mouth shut underwater. But
we've always been a creative family. Like you said, though, poor, bored, and creative. We could afford, a $2.50 comic, once a week, but we had video games, of course. Mom and dad didn't like keep us in poverty and let us not have anything fun. But because of that, we stretched out our creativity. And I think that's a lot of people that get into comics, cosplay, any of the kind of nerdier endeavors, that they focused on it as a kid, and they kind of almost hyper fixated on some of it to learn it, and went, now I'm going to create things. And it's both a stress reliever and a stressor all at the same time.
Yeah. I think a natural progression. I mean, it's sort of like, I'll use my other hobby as like people who run. It's like, it starts out as you just want to run a little bit for fitness, or then you want to run a 5K, and then you're running these ultra marathons. I think like when we were growing up, we couldn't afford a ton of toys. So, Spider-Man and Han Solo hung out together because you had to make it make sense. And I had these I remember being 18, 19, still having these complex inner working stories of all these toys I had. And I think eventually even that becomes too restricting. So then you have to move on to something else, which is where I think indie comics shine is, don't get me wrong, I would love to play in the Marvel or DC sandpit. If they called, I think almost any character they gave me, I could research and find a story for. But with indie comics, the sky's the limit. It's this really interesting thing where you create this entire universe and then you just play in it. And you can, I say you can do what you want. You let the characters do what you want or what they're supposed to do in these situations. But then you go from having to play with Spider-Man and Han Solo to you have this universe, and now you and your artist can go, what do we want to do? What can we do with these characters and let them flow and live?
Yeah. We had a comment from Craylee Vanest. She's one of my podcast co-hosts. She said, a lot of artists, all forms of art, start because they're either poor or lonely. Apparently being creative is a good escape for both of those.
Yeah. Why not? I mean, Blind Melon says talking about fiction it rips your life away, but it's a great escape. And even it's cheap. I mean, all I need to start writing is this pad of paper I've got on now. I'm just doing this for notes, but now it's, it's your startup cost is a ream of paper, or even like Scoot. A lot of people say, like I've heard people with him doing commissions will say, well, how can you charge this much? The materials are so cheap. And yeah, like a Bristol board pad's $10, but you're not paying for the material, you're paying for his skills. And you're paying for the time not only the time he's investing, say it takes him 10 hours to draw the commission for you, you're investing all these years of practice. Because if it was just the cost of startup paper, then I would do it, but I can't because that's not the art I focus on is drawing. So
you can't get paid in exposure.
Sorry, I had a bad joke about exposing yourself, but that's not the point. No, but to put it, he's more mundane like parallel is a plumber. You hire a plumber and you pay him well because he knows how to fix it, and you're not paying him because it took him 10 minutes and his use of his, you're not renting his wrench and his time, you're renting, the skill base. And you're talking about startup costs. You're right, it's low. And that's why you see a lot of folks from other mediums jump in. Like you'll see so many animators that would love to, get their own ideas off the ground, but to get a green light, to get a budgeted, get a budget to produce a cartoon show is, is a huge hassle. And there's a lot more money involved in people. But then you go to comics, especially if you're an animator, artists, art somewhat well, different, mediums. And then you can just, do that. And of course you see a lot of, it's interesting. You see a lot of movie folks will jump in and they'll do that because it's a cheap way to, show proof of concept and to get your idea out as well. And I think the big thing is with all of us, being nerds growing up and entertaining ourselves, even though we love certain things, we're not taught that, this can only do TV only shows you cop dramas. Movies only shows you blockbusters. You don't learn that. And so you're all like, I want to do a Western comic book, which anyone tell you right now, that's not a really big, market, but you're like, you can do it. And you have the lower, overhead cost. So you're not out as much if you're going to be like, I'm going to make a Western TV show. It's like, you can only do those one at a time, or unless you're that one guy who does all the Yellowstone shows. So it's, it gives you a lot more freedom. Now you got to control your expectations. Just because you make it doesn't mean like I said, Westerns aren't as big anymore. So even though you make a Western comic, and then it also goes back to the things like, well, now you made the thing, you're not done yet. Even if you do get a publisher to help you out, it's like they're not going to do all the work. They got other books to push too. So you're still, you're working all the time. If you're not working, the comic is not reaching its full potential at any point.
You have to be your own hype man, because if you don't have a company like Marvel, DC, Image to back you, you've got to promote yourself. And I see that at conventions, and Brad, definitely, I know you see it, David, I'm sure you see it at conventions.
Mm-hmm.
The people that are up talking, engaging with the attendees are the ones that are going to make the better sales. I was talking, I have a friend that's an indie writer, and he does not sit down the whole weekend unless he's like eating or taking just a quick break, but he's selling his books. And he's got other authors going, man, how are you doing that? I'm not selling anything. And he's like looking over, and they're sitting in the, their chair, and they got their phone like this. And somebody walks up, like, hey, and if you don't engage, you don't sell your product, people are just going to go, oh, well, maybe it's not worth looking at.
Or even not even at a negative, or you got to realize cons are such a sensory overload. And since a lot of people now we've figured out, especially nerds, they're on the spectrum, or, they have a lot of other things, it's hard to absorb. So how do you stand out? But on the flip side, that is hard. When you write something, at least I know from my perspective, and I'm sorry, keep going on and on, Brad, but you're putting yourself out there. When you write the book and you put it out, you can hide, it's out there. Look at the book, not me. But a con, you have to be like, okay, let's do this again. Hi. And you're basically, when you're doing every book, you're like, hey, do you like me? Do you validate me? And if they go, yeah, no, you're like, oh, why'd you kick me? Even though that's not what they mean, they could be busy or distracted, or, they got to get to that panel. It's hard to take those, and
it's
over
the elevator
a 3-day
pitch.
marathon.
You've got to be able to pitch it quick because the attention span.
Yeah.
And, it's like Brad used to say, he doesn't have a booth separate. He hangs out with Scoot, because Scoot's art is going to draw people in. Brad goes, nobody's going to walk up and go, ooh, look at this awesome script that's just sitting on a table. The art is there to assist the writer.
And I know with like the nerd community in general, you get a lot of introverted people. So if you have an introverted people, I'll tell you this, find you an extrovert. Scoot did it. Scoot is not as extroverted as I am. He's not an introvert by any means, but he was nervous his first booth. He was not sure. So he had me there. And again, I will talk to anybody. And the thing I say is, you're at a convention for comics or whatever it might be, even if it's just a general nerd convention, you have something in common with everybody there, and that's that you have the same passion and the same obsession for these fictional universes that we all do. So you can communicate with anybody. Not saying you have to force people to talk. If people, hey, how you doing? And they walk off, just let them go. But you can find somebody who can come out and be your hype person, because just because it helps your booth doesn't mean you have to get out of your comfort zone that hard. Doesn't mean that you want to do that. But maybe find somebody to help you elevate that and bring it out. Get somebody to bring it in, because I know Scoot, when he gets commissions, he's head down drawing, and he'll hear, hey, what's going on? Come on in and take a look at the artwork, and he'll look up and know to engage. But if you are those people who it's almost impossible for me to do it because my social battery is massive. But if you have sensory overload, or you're nervous talking to people, that's okay. Find somebody you trust who can help you because I guarantee you, they're going to do a better job hyping you up. Because I'll hype Scoot up all day. You would have thought he hung the moon. And then my comic at the first convention, they were like, what's this? Like, oh, it's just a comic I wrote. And Scoot's like, dude, do better. Stop me and let me know. So it's good because you'll have find someone who sees the worth in you and sees the skill and the talent, and will hype you up. And then you can have them to kind of buffer between you and the chaos of a convention.
Yeah. And what y'all both just said is perfect. What Crayley commented says, I hope some people can take a friend to help them who is less prone to overload. I often have help like that. And it's true. And like you said, I just did a little mini con it was the Daughters of Dorkness down here. And my friend Robin, who's a writer and a cosplayer, she was next to me. I'm over here hyping every one of her books. I'm like, I've read them all. This one's about this. This one's about this. She's like, you sell my books better than me. And I said, well, you're over here hyping my sewing skills and telling people to buy the things I make better than I am telling. So you find your tribe, you find the people that are going to be your cheerleader and in your corner.
And I'd like to think that goes back to, you have a different personal investment. It's not you. You're not being vulnerable. You're helping out a friend, which I would argue is far more comfortable than selling yourself.
Because it feels egotistical. It can feel like you're like, oh, I'm so good. Look at my work. Yeah. When you're really just going, hey, I hope you enjoy my work. It's a weird balance to find the right wording, the right pitch, the personality that you put out there to people. And each person's going to respond differently.
Brad brought up an interesting thing I wanted to
I said you two might just need to become friends and have a good time talking writing.
Yeah. Well, he's talking about, we all have something in common in the cons, and everyone's introverted, or, a lot of people are feeling awkward, but then they find their tribe. And I thought it's an interesting little hiccup that you find at cons where they just want to unload everything.
Yeah.
Where they relate, but they're all like, oh, let's talk about Game of Thrones. I'm like, I have nothing like that at my booth, but you got to be cool, and you can't be like, go away, I'm trying to sell books. You be like, oh, okay, but you can't be there like, dude, we've been here 5 hours. You're gonna buy it because you got to remember, it's like they found people there. It's hard to interact, so you're giving. It's very different than interacting online where everyone goes, that sucks, and it's more negative. It's more positive.
We refer to them as booth barnacles.
Like I've done a lot of vampire, like I said, I've done a lot of vampire stories, and I can go through the generations of the type of comments I got, where our people would love to tell me about Buffy, and then they wanted to tell me about how much they hated Twilight, and then then they wanted to tell me something else, and I'm like, it's like that doesn't it doesn't affect me one way or the other.
You're but, like, that's not my product.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's once again, it goes back to some of that spectrum of your brain just relates things to each other. And, I love talking to those people at cons, but after a while you need them to move on. And so we have friends that walk the con, and they're not afraid to walk up and start like being, oh man, hey, can you tell me about this thing, to kind of break that. They're not doing it to be mean, but they also go, you had a booth barnacle and you looked like you needed help. So our friend Mark is very good at that. Yeah.
I have a great Will Wheaton story, but it's a little long-winded and it deals with it in a very humorous way, but I don't have to tell it because, Brad should talk to.
Aubrey Cavett, she said, love the intensity of Vamp stories. Well,
I do too. That's why
we
I
might
love
have to
doing
turn
them.
her on to a few stories you've written.
Yeah, gotta check out all the Dust stuff. Which, if you search up my name, David Daub, into Amazon and Dusk, you'll find most of my stuff there. Either mostly digitally. I'm been reworking to get physical copies.
That's another thing that's made it easier in the internet age. Us growing up, stapling computer paper and making our own comics. Now you can put it out digitally and you're not out as much cost. You've got a quicker access to an audience. And like you said, even crowdfunding to do those prints. So it's
the double side to that though is
now it's saturated.
Yes, thank you. That's what I was going to get into. And some people even I have found, and it's more on the novel side, game the Amazon system to where they don't even seem to worry about what they're writing. They just they form these little groups where sharing out books, because Kindle does a weird thing to where if so many people reads pages and all that you get money from their Kindle direct publishing fund, or it's a weird thing. And so there's a bunch of people who go, oh, here's some free books, here's from 99 cents. Yeah. And they make money on the back end sort of thing. And then now with all the AI generated books, it's unfortunate, because most of us who get into this stuff is because we love it, not to make money, because honestly, there's easier ways to make money. And then there's these other people who's like, well, we're just going to make money. You're like, oh, you're killing the fun.
Yeah.
I'm going to drag it a different direction talking about budget is I've got this list. I printed it out as a document I keep, and it's called What I've Learned, in case anyone asks. And there's a guy, I'm assuming his name was Conan Comics by Cron. It was just this thing I saw him on Twitter, and it was talking about something he sees, a problem he sees with indie comics is people writing it. His quote is, comics should be the goal of comics, not a Netflix deal. Stop writing comics as if you have a special effects budget for TV. How many pages of sipping coffee in a diner and talking about issues do you need? Be bold, be exciting. Comics have no limits. And I think that's interesting because, man, like my favorite indie comics, like Afterlife Incorporated, which is right over on my shoulder, John Locke from England, and then Gunner and Creek Quarter, all these really like wild, high concept ideas that, unless Amazon decided to send $1 billion to them like they did the Rings of Power, they're never going to get a show. But in that sense, that's what makes their comics so amazing, is they're these really crazy and bombastic ideas that you will never see in a show. That's why we like them. That's why as cool as the MCU is, there's still stuff you will never see in that. I doubt we'll ever see Annihilation, where we have these gigantic galaxy-destroying events led by a nihilist with Celestials showing up to fight him. And that's fine, because that's what comics are for. Comics are to be – your budget is how much you can pay your artist, because let's be real, no one's paying indie writers until they hit a publisher. So like when I have a comic, I go out and try to find artists to pay to bring my story to life. So if I can pay them $20 or $100 a page, that's my budget. But still, again, the VXF budget is massive, because it's just paper and then you translating it. So I think a lot of people try to get bogged down in those special issues. Like Donny Cates had an amazing issue of Venom that was, most of the page was just 9 panels of Eddie Brock's face and him emoting and him telling this story. And it was flashing back and forth. And by the end, you find out he's talking to Steve Rogers. He's calling in the Avengers because Null's on his way. And so many people are like, oh, you're going to make a comic that's just 9 panels and it's just his face the whole time. Well, he had 30 other issues that were full of these amazing action sequences and these over-the-top segments and Absolute Carnage and all this stuff that he earned that. Yeah. So that's fine. There's always time to have that sit-down issue. Another good example is The Conversation, one of Straczynski's issues of Spider-Man, where Aunt May found out about Peter being Spider-Man, and it was this whole conversation. But too many indie writers go for that immediately rather than doing something wild and over the top. Like even with some of the local scenes where again, I wanted to be the official editor of a local anthology, and they wouldn't let me. But I noticed so many times, like we all had 8 pages tops to get this story out. And so many people, 6 to 7 pages were billed and talking and stories, and you get 1 page of action. When I told Scoot, I was like, we're coming straight out the gate. We have 1 page
with action.
we have 1 page of building and scene setting to let you know where it is, and then boom, it's right out the door. Because another thing on my list is Stan Lee was famous for saying it's your fault whether you're someone's first or last comic book. So if David wrote an incredible story and people said, wow, this is fantastic, I want to read the next issue, or wow, this was boring, I'm done. So it's your job to capture their attention and keep them going. Now, it's changed a little bit since his time, but I think it still rings true. Is if I get an indie comic and the first issue is 20 pages of 2 people sitting and talking, unless they are just the best character writers on the planet, I'm going to lose interest immediately. And that's me, who I like reading scripts that are boring. I like digging into the minutia and the backstory and notes. But you've got a short amount of time to grab people's attention. Going back again to saturation, there's so much on the market. How are you going to pull these people in? How are you going to draw them in? And how can you do that with our chosen medium?
And as a writer, you have to understand it's a collaborative medium, but it's also a very visual medium.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of, and it comes from the writing side, the novel side, I'd argue. Everyone wants to world build and bring it all up. They want to get all the details. It's like, well, you got to pace yourself. Not everything's like, everything at once. You got to, and you have to, you can put those details in the script for the artist, because he can't be mystified. But, sometimes a little mystery and a little, slow education, show, don't tell.
I even feel that, because I'll read Brad's writing. He'll send it my way because I enjoy writing, but not enough to make it what you guys do. But it's something I enjoy and I love to read. So he'll send me a script and be like, hey, what do you think? And I'll be turning pages. I'm like, oh, dang. And then my brain goes, my brother wrote this. I'm like, this is so cool. And seeing the collaboration with Brad and then our brother Scoot, but he's also worked with other artists. I've got, when I've showed some of the pictures of y'all's art from stories that y'all have done. But, it's one of those where it's different with each creator too. You can't write a script the same for this artist that you write for that artist unless they've worked together, and it's more of a formulated, this is how the company goes. But as indie people, y'all are literally finding other indie people and going, okay, how can we work together?
Yeah. And that's one thing I wanted to bring up with when you're trying to find an artist is, they like, a lot of artists like the big splashy stuff. So you sometimes have the problem where you see their portfolio and, it's like, oh, great. You can show people knocking the crap out of people. Great. You can do that all day long. Now, can you show me them quietly, talking for 2 or 3 panels? I don't need a specialist in one or the other, but someone who can handle both. And
you
also
need a jack of all trades.
Yeah. And it also dawned on me, a lot of old ancient comics, if you look at them, they had caption boxes and they had a lot of word bubbles. You don't see word bubbles anymore. But a lot of that was because, if you think about it, they were a lot of books were anthologies, like Spider-Man was an amazing fantasy, and you only had 6 or 7 pages to establishes what's going on and recap what happened previously. So it's like, and that's why they would say things out loud like, oh no, she's going to fall. I must hit my web slinger just like. No one would do that, but you'd have to. And also back then they got paid by the word. So, heck yeah, you're going to put as many words as you can put on the page.
I think that gets into comic real estate and the economy of storytelling and how you need to expedite things. Shannon Merritt, who owns 901 Comics here in town, he has a little publishing label called Bad Dog Comics, and we used to have bi-weekly creator meetings. And I don't know how many times I heard people say, you can go from Earth to space in 1 page. And now there's times where you need to show the build there, but sometimes you just need your characters to get to space. So get them to space immediately. And I think what that gets into as well, like when you're collaborating with an artist, is something I learned from Greg Cravens, another great local artist. He's doing caricatures at every convention around here, but he also does comics, and they're all amazing. He does Stone Ninja around here.
He's a very multi-talented artist.
He said that when you look at a comic page, there's no action in the panels. The action is in the gutters. And what he means by that is your artist has to be good enough to take panel 1 and panel 2 and show you 2 actions, and then your brain fills it in the gutter. And part of that is your job as the writer, because you have to sit and think of, when you're writing your script, you have to think about the page. You have to think about what needs to happen and what needs to be shown. And I try to do my best job of that, but a good collaborative artist will look, and I don't know how many times Scoot's told me, I don't need this panel. Like, cool, lose it then, because you're the one telling the story. If you can tell, if your panels can allow that gutter to fill in the imagination, or your imagination to fill that gutter in with the Spidey standing there and then he's punching the next one, you don't need to show Spidey squaring up, moving, swinging. You just need to show him and then show the next guy getting punched, and your brain will fill that in. And I think that's another, because indie comics, what I like is if I decide I want a comic to be 30 pages, cool, I can make it 30 pages. I'm not constrained to 22 pages like a normal mainstream comic, but also, are you using that real estate correctly? And even Scoot and I were having like a creative meeting the other day where we were talking about it. We've got 2 comics we've always tried to get off the ground, and one's B-Movie Saga and one's the Atlas Beetle. And I told him, he was talking about wanting to go back and do the Atlas Beetle. And I said, yes, I love that because I love superheroes. I like that, not like that hopeful person you can look up to, hero that's there for the city. And I've written a bunch of really fun stuff, and I've written probably the first 10 issues, but I told him if we go back to it, those first 5 are going in the trash and I'm restarting, because one, I wrote them 12 years ago at this point, and I've hopefully improved as a writer, but I can even go back and look at it and say, these first 2 issues don't need to be issues. They can be flashbacks. I can tell these 2 issues in 2 to 3 pages over time, little flashbacks. I can start with issue 3, but also rewrite it to go this. So I think that's something you need to always look for. Like, again, when you're proofreading, you should always be proofreading. Are you using it? It doesn't matter that you can write a 50-page comic because you're an indie writer. Do you need those 50 pages?
Yeah.
Is necessary, because again, you've got to keep people's attention, and in a world where Twitter only lets you do 250 characters or whatever it is, people's attention span is not what it used to be. So you have to. I would love, if there are plenty of people, plenty of indie creators, if they wrote a 50-page comic, I would read it multiple times.
Again, over and over.
You have to,
and you got to know. Sorry, you got to know what sort of pacing or story or tone you're going for, because you were talking about, like, with a fight scene, if it's meant to be quick and kinetic, like a Spider-Man who's a fast guy and jumping around, you don't need to show him doing every action. You can show quick. And so it's like, well, if you saw that moving, you'd be blurry. But then if you're doing, like, say, a Sin City one, to where it's meant to be more gritty and noir, you do the slow things where you see the sweat on the brow, see the clenching of the fist, because because you would see that and it would be a slower pace. You got to know kind of what the speed is you're at. But I will admit, I have used little, talking about doing quick transitions. That's one of the few times I only use captions where I'll say, like, meanwhile, elsewhere in space. Obviously, I'd make it sound a little bit better, just to give someone a little bit of a clue to understand how we get there. Because I have found even today, a lot of people who weren't raised on it, because not everyone was raised on comics, they don't fully get how the sequential, format works.
On that thought, there's something I loved when, I forget the name of the podcast. I think it was Stegman and His Amazing Friends, but Donnie Cates was on there, and he was talking about panels, and he was very, how he described it was, a panel can be one action. And he goes, the number of panels you need to show, like, to convey a point is denoted by how many actions it takes. But you can skip actions to some degree. And his example was like, if you have somebody sitting at a desk and someone's threatening them and they open the drawer and there's a gun, and then they pull the gun on the person. You don't need to show them open the drawer, grab the gun, cock it, pull it up to their face, and pull the trigger. What you do is you show a panel of the drawer open, you see the gun in it, and then the very next panel can be firing, because your brain in that gutter again goes, oh, that gun went from that drawer to his hand, he cocked it, fired. But then he talked about during absolute carnage, there was a thing he created where Dark Carnage was throwing these symbiote maggots out, and they were infecting people. So in that, he had to show Carnage pulling these maggots out, throwing them hitting the inmates, infecting them, and then turning them into Carnage symbiote, like followers. And so where something that you could have done that many panels for the gun pulling, but you don't have to. But when it's something weird, you have to make sure you're showing.
You have to explain a little bit better.
Yeah.
What I love,
like you said, you have to know your audience. You have to know what they are going to be able to fill in, especially if it's the first time. Like you said, we've all seen a gun pulled from a drawer, but we haven't all seen Carnage throw maggots at people and turn them into drones. So you know, maybe after several times of doing that, you can shorten the action.
Yes.
But you know, it's an introduction for the first time.
Well, I love those when you look at sub-formatting, why they did it, because it was behind the scenes reasons. Like earlier, like I was saying, when, you know, Spider-Man or Captain America, they were only 6 to 8 page stories. They had to do things quick. But then if you look at, like, say, you know, people love the slow, action heavy, you know, multiple panels in, say, traditional manga. But then you realize, well, they didn't do that necessarily because they embraced it, but also because they gotta churn that stuff out weekly. And if you only have so much plot, yes, you're going to spend a chapter on a fight until you can, you know,
we're going to be making that bomb in Dragon Ball Z for 20 episodes or 20 chapters.
Exactly. And it's honestly, it's padding, or, you know, giving yourself some space. And it's not a bad thing because people love that style. But I find it interesting that a lot of styles come from practical reasons.
Yeah.
Like everyone goes, this is more of a technical or technology thing, but everyone goes, oh, Superman, he has that blue hair. It's like, because the technology back then cannot show highlights in black hair. How do you show that little sheen? Blue, because they only had, red, blue, and green. So you just had to do combination dots of those, and that's all you ended up with. So I always find it interesting. It's like, well, and we still keep these today because, like, why do we have it divided up as letterist, colorist, artist, and writer? Because they did that bullpen sort of idea to where it was assembly line, where I give it to next person. So am I working on page 3? Artist is working on page 2. Letterer is working on page 1. So you're you know, and it's interesting because we still hold a lot of that. And some of it works great because you got some people that do, you know, to such amazing lettering. Like I've had a letterer who, when I was younger and more verbose, knew how to make it all fit and was such a lifesaver. But it's still interesting how a lot of things were done for particular reasons that we still do it, and we use it in different ways for reasons that no longer exist for us.
Yeah, and I guess I'm just gonna kind of segue into that. Because you mentioned it earlier, and I was gonna bring it up, but you were talking about the guy who just gives short stories. I usually write full scripts. That's what I like. I like to write full scripts. It's fun. I think that gives my best. I've had the best response with artists. But like when I was working with Dale Martin on the Dragon Templar, we went full Marvel method. And for people who don't know what that is, that's sitting down and giving you a synopsis, usually a 1-page synopsis. So what Dale and I would do is we'd meet for a drink somewhere. We would talk about which story we were tackling. We would write a few notes. He would give some input. We'd push back and forth. And then over the next week or so, I would write him a 1-page synopsis with maybe, you know, here's what's happening. You start here. We're going here. We need to end up here. And it was probably about 4 or 5 paragraphs, and that's it. And then he would take it and do real loose, 5 to 10 pages, whatever it needed, because we were doing shorter stories. And then he would come back, and I would do very loose lettering over the top of it, and then ask him, can you change this? And we'd go back and forth instead of me going page 1, page 2. And it was a very different method. It was very intense the first time we did it. I struggled with it, but it also led to a very different type of collaboration, to where we even, when we release the stories, we switch our names. Because normally it's writer, artist, and then everybody else at the bottom. But it was Dale, Brad, and then it was Brad and Dale. And we switched because we were both equally invested in the storytelling. It wasn't, I think he put himself down as the artist, but we both like listed as, it was artist, but then we were both listed as storytellers. So it was a very fun way, as opposed to, like, if I did that to Scoot, he would have an aneurysm. Like, he would be so
Tell him what to draw.
Yeah, and so, and again, Scoot does the same. Scoot, especially once he got more comfortable, he will push back and say, we don't need this. Or even he pushed back, or he pushed forward, I would say, because we had our last 8-page story we did. He said, can I make the last one a 2-page spread? I said, sure. I'm not paying you anymore, but sure. And he did it. It completely transformed the story. It made it great. I saw her mention.
Yeah,
she mentioned that.
We throw up the comments if y'all. Well, we're good.
Oh no,
that's true. That book is available everywhere. I got it at How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. I got it at Five Below for like $4.
Yeah, you can. It's everywhere now. It used to be, we don't talk about comics, and now everybody likes comics, so you can find it a lot easier.
Scoot's definitely read that book, and I read it and gave it back to him because it's more about the art side, but it's still very interesting. And to that matter, I think my pet peeve, and I'm kind of interested if David has a pet peeve as a writer too, is I hear so many who they'll be at a booth and they're signing and they'll draw a picture and it's terrible, and they're like, haha, this is why I'm the writer, and it drives me nuts because I'm not a writer because I can't draw. I'm a writer because I love to write. If I wanted to be an artist, I would have focused all my time into learning anatomy or learning, how everything Scoot does. But Scoot has the exact opposite. He has no desire to write. He has no desire to fully create these characters, even though he helps me. Maybe it's a bit megalomaniac, but I like to create these worlds and create these characters and give them personalities and then introduce them to situations or concepts that they then react to, and I just write it out. And
character design part of it. That's why I love helping you create characters for some of the stories that y'all are working on. I love character design. Maybe not so much writing the full story, but giving them their background, why they look the way they do, what they've got, all that kind of stuff. That's where I love the writing.
You like to make costumes for characters? I would never guess that.
What a surprise! But yeah, it's this idea. Like, I've got on my desk in there, like where I sit and write, I have a stack of books, and it's not like, I can write and words just come out. There's no different from art. There's discipline, there's training, there's learning, there's taking advice and criticism from other people. I mean, there's all this stuff that you have to do. Writing is no easier than drawing. It's just where do you focus your talent? I've got a sewing machine sitting over here. That doesn't mean I can make a costume like Anne can. I am nowhere near her level, and that's because I don't focus my energy that way. So, like, that's my writing pet peeve, where I'm just like, I'm gonna roll my eyes and Scoot, we're gonna talk about something else because I can't go over there.
Well, I found that unfortunately, comics at multiple levels, we have self-esteem issues because of being the the weird offspring, or the black sheep of the family, or at least from I've seen it. We've gotten a lot better, with a lot of people in it, but there's a lot of us, it's like, oh, we're comics, and then because comics is such a visual medium, and I catch myself doing it. It's like, no, I'm just a writer. I mean, and people are like, no, you're the writer. I'm like, oh yeah, right. Sorry, I fell into my own trap. Is I think we do prioritize it differently, and it's just bad habits that we is ingrained in the industry that we got to get out of. To where if you look, I'm sure.
Quick. We're at, I'm just going to pop this up real quick. We are at $368 of our $1,500 goal for comic books for kids. So thank you, everybody that's been donating and listening to us talk for the last 50 minutes already, guys.
We still got another 3 hours I could talk to you.
I wish if we didn't have other panels to go, maybe we'll just have to, do some more talks.
The
fundraiser, we'll do the marathon nighttime one.
Yes.
Fundraiser goes through the start of February?
It goes through the first full week of February. So we're going to make this goal, guys. We're going to put comic books like we're talking about right now in kids' hands in hospitals. And they send things to the military. So putting comic books in hands. While we have 10 minutes, let me cover y'all. I just want to show off the pictures that y'all sent from things you've gotten. Here's the reason David is an amazing guy. He's actually the Sorcerer Supreme.
That's awesome.
He's actually the Sorcerer Supreme. That's why he can do all of this.
Yes.
And then
it's of 615, so I'm not as popular as the guy in 616.
Well, it's okay. But I'm going to show them. Y'all can tell us what these series are real quick that we're showing off here.
Yeah, Texas Horror. It's an anthology book that I did of horror stories set in and around by Texas creators in Texas. And it's basically a big breakup letter with Texas, because me and we're done. I've moved away. I'm in Pennsylvania now. We broke up, and it was an ugly breakup. So this is an ugly breakup letter with Texas.
We love that. And then this was the other one that David has sent me.
Yes, this is. Sorry, I didn't find the titled one.
That's okay.
This is the Trials and Tribulations of Miss Tilney. I just love the Victorian age. I love the mystique of all of that. And it was actually, I loved it so much. We were running D&D, and they have a Gothic side, and they have a subset of it where you do it in Victorian times. So we were playing that, and I just kind of took all that content we generated from that and put it into comic book form.
And this is how I met David at A-Kon in Dallas years ago. They had a Victorian costume contest, and I was their A-Kon winner. So years ago, and we've stayed in touch since then. So it's a fun book. I've read it. I've gotten some black and white sheets and colored them before digitally. It's really fun. So you should definitely check that one out.
Cool. I need to get the fourth one to you then, because I don't think.
Yes, I've enjoyed them. They're a lot of fun. Cool. And I like me a good female lead. So let's see. And then we got a couple from Brad.
I spoke about this one earlier. That was the one I did with Dale Martin. It came from, I went to a studio viewing of his, and he had this great picture of a dragon wearing just like medieval armor. And if you're a writer, like sometimes you look at something and an idea just sticks in your head and it just won't come out until you put it to paper or computer. And so I wrote this 9-page story for him about this dragon that fought for the Templars, who was drug into the Crusades. And he said, instead of almost better than saying he loved it, he said, I like the idea. How about this? And he pitched a different version of it. And then I pitched it back and forth. And this is the guy that I did the Marvel method with, where we did this first issue. It's 10 pages. It introduces you to all the main characters. There's some good dialogue. I think I've gotten a few good compliments on the inner dialogue for it. The narration, the third party omniscient narration. And it's this story about what would happen if there was this tactical team during the Crusades who they had the equivalent of a fighter jet or a tank on their side during the Crusades. And how does that deal with, if you had a breakup letter with Texas, this is my breakup letter with Catholicism. Like, we were raised in this very Southern traditional Christianity style. And this is me going, is this right? Are they right? What, and not saying everyone's bad at all, but what about the extremism of it? When extremism goes bad, how does it affect people? And how does this character, who's obviously not part of the human race, how does he deal with it? And so we got fun little criticisms of war and crusades and all this stuff. It was really fun. And I need to get, I've got the second one. He drew the second one. I've got to letter it. We need it because it's a really fun story.
I need the story. All right, let's see. I get to have a little hand in this one because I did the coloring on this picture.
This is the original first in progress cover we did for the Atlas Beetle. It's a Scoot. When Scoot was starting to draw again back in 2010, he said, I want to draw a story. And I pitched him a very down to earth superheroes, not even superheroes, super powered people story about these two brothers who discover their powers in high school, all the trials and tribulations that come with that. I was really going for a more grounded version of what I grew up with X-Men, where X-Men were the strangest teams around. And he read it and he said, again, maybe the best times is when people say, good idea, how about this? And he said, I like it, but he's like, I want to draw crazy costumes. I want to draw people throwing cars. I want to draw superpowered villains. I said, all right. So I went back and I redid it and I started thinking about this hero, basing them in Memphis because we grew up in Memphis. And what would that hero look like? The hero can't jump across buildings. We don't have enough downtown buildings to do that. So how do they get around? How do they move around? What would their enemies be? Who would be the closest cities with other superheroes? And Scoot and I, being big fans of like Japanese pop culture, pulled some references from a Kamen Rider, and then we both like insects, and so we started basing them around beetles, and we kind of came up with this guy who is the quick version is he has a super soldier serum. He's faster, stronger, all that. No flying, anything like that, but we kind of started it as almost a trope, pulling out superheroes tropes. Like there's even every time you have a hero crossover, the heroes fight for a second. They realize they were actually both heroes and they team up against the villain. And it kind of started as that, like, let's just go through all the tropes and have fun. And it evolved into this massive universe with possible spinoffs and all this stuff. And sadly, I think it's one we're scared of. Like we've backed off of it a couple of times. We start working on it, and then we're like, we're not ready for this. And the last time we talked, Scoot said, I am ready for this. We need to do this. And I said, I am too, and we need to change the story. We need to start it faster because in the original, the first couple of issues, you don't even see his costume. You just get a bill. And so like I hopefully if my wish, every time I see a shooting star, my wish is that the Atlas Beetle will be alive soon, and hopefully sooner rather than later, because with the world, I won't drag on too long, but Sony's whole Spider-Man character universe they did, the tagline for it was the world has enough heroes. And I refuse to believe that. The world always needs heroes. It always needs people to look up to. And the important thing of someone being covered in a mask is that it can be anything. So you look up to that, you look up to Spider-Man, and that can be you. You look up to, Batman, and that could be you. And so the Atlas Beetle is our thank you and our love letter to all these heroes we grew up with, and maybe adding one that someone could look up to one day when they need a little strength.
I've got two. I'm going to flip through them real quick. The same, but what they are, Brad.
Yeah, movie saga. So this is not a joke on Staples and Vaughn's saga. It's called B Movie Saga, based after a song by the Fratellis, which is my favorite band. But that was the first thing we ever made together for the anthology. And it was I was in my senior year of college, and I kind of wrote as decompression, but I couldn't focus on anything too intense. So I said, hey, Scoot, can you draw me 2 characters, male, female, blah, blah, blah. I gave him some stuff. I was just like old school, early 1900s, like speculative science fiction. I want bubble helmets and fitted suits and guns that don't make sense. We don't need any kind of scientific backing for this. We don't need to explain why anything works. Like they're faster than light travel. I can't even explain them here because of this word. But it's just meant to have fun. The Atlas Beetle has a set of rules, and it has rules we have to play by. But B Movie Saga has none. So we tell crazy gladiator stories, or we tell stories of mimics, or them falling into black holes, or them, whatever we want. And we wrote our first anthology story for that is, I guess it's not really available anywhere. I could email it to people if they wanted it. And then we have a second story that we want to pair together. I just had a lot of trouble with my letters. So I got to get a new letterer, and it's basically shipping out the door. So I need to finish that one, because then we want to do the first 3 issues, and that's going to find another artist. That's the Boot Studios short-term plan.
All right, so we're at the very end. So real quick, we'll see. Tell us, David, where can people find you online if they want to talk to you or see your books?
Yeah, like I said, you can find me on Amazon. I have a lot of my stuff digitally there. Also, Global Comics. I have most of that. That's the dirty little secret, because they're mostly free there. And
hey, your people, buy things, guys. Buy things.
Yes. Well, I've done so much. I don't mind giving people a taste, and then they'll want more. Just like at the grocery stores, like try this weird product, and then you'll want to buy it.
Right. And Brad, where can they look you up?
Man, I don't really have a good. This is anti self-promoting, but follow Scoot's art at everything. SKOOTSAART, because he's our brother. And right now, basically, I do everything through him. When we're putting out pages or we're putting out projects, when we stream, when we talk about anything, it's all through him. So eventually, we'll have a Brute Studio, stuff like that. But right now, we don't. So follow him, and one, because his art's beautiful, and two, if I've got anything coming up, it'll pass through him as well.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. This was really seriously awesome. And so I'm going to play our outro video so people know what they are donating to. And again, thank you. This went by way faster than it should have.
Yeah, great time. And go donate.
Go donate. Give comic books for kids. Let me find my outro. All right. Bye, everybody.
Yeah. And The Multiverse Fundraiser is partnering with Comic Books for Kids to raise money for their cause. Their mission is to provide comic books to children in hospitals and cancer centers across the United States, Canada, and the UK. We believe in the importance of providing stories that promote hope and bravery to kids who are facing things that are scarier than any supervillain. And we truly believe in this cause. To donate, you can either go to our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/The Multiverse Fundraiser or directly to comicbooksforkids.org.
The Multiverse Fundraiser would like to thank our sponsors: Earth Dog Studios, Clobbern Comics, The Art of Brian Rodman, Studio Moonfall, Elusive Comics, and of course, the Phoenix Sisters Entertainment Network for hosting this event. Learn how to support these businesses on the MVFR website.